"No maid touches my piano," the Duke of Denningham said. "Not to dust it, not to open it, not to set a chair within 4 feet of it. Whoever lays a hand on that instrument leaves this house the same hour, without a character." He said it in the stone passage to 11 servants, standing in a line with their backs to the whitewash, in the flat, unhurried voice of a man reading out a length of fence. Then he went up the service stair 2 steps at a time, and the 11 of them stood a moment longer in the cold, because nobody wanted to be the first to move. Esther Lovell was at the far end of the line, holding a coal scuttle in both hands. In the right-hand pocket of her apron, under a folded duster, lay a steel tuning lever, with an ebony handle worn pale on one side, and it was still warm from where her hand had been. It had everything to do with her. She had come to Denningham Court in April for one reason, and the reason lived in the room that instrument stood in. The 5th Duke, Vincent Arden's father, had played every evening of his adult life. He was not a great player. He was a serious one, which is a rarer thing, and he had chaired the fund for the relief of decayed musicians for 31 years, and every September he opened his own music room to 80 subscribers for the fund's benefit concert. He had died in the February of the year before, quite suddenly, in a chair beside that piano, with a page of music still standing open on the desk. His son came home from Portugal, buried him, and shut the lid. The dust sheet went over the case. The tuner from Chester, who had come twice a year for 2 decades, was told his services would not be wanted, and a maid called Hannah Froude was dismissed in June for lifting the corner of the sheet to look underneath. Her own hands had been on pianos since she was 6. Her father, Elias Lovell, tuned for the trade in Chester, and took his daughter on the rounds from the year she could carry the rest-pin case, and she learned the way a child learns a language, which is to say, without noticing. By 15, she could set a temperament by ear alone. By 18, she was doing half his work in his name, because a girl could not be a tuner, and a tuner's daughter could be anything at all so long as nobody wrote it down. He died when she was 16, and after the funeral, a gentleman from the Fund for the Relief of Decayed Musicians came to their 2 rooms in Chester, sat with his hat on his knee, and told her mother that the fund existed exactly for cases like theirs. Judith Lovell was entered on the list at £12 a year. She said afterward that it was like a hand under her elbow on a step. In 8 years, she had never received a shilling of it. She had not chosen Denningham because it was a great house. She had chosen it because the fund's chairman had been the 5th Duke of Denningham for 31 years, and because a chairman keeps his papers, and because a housemaid dusts a library. The library at Denningham held, on the 3rd shelf of the 2nd press, 9 slim printed volumes in blue paper wrappers, the annual report of the Fund for the Relief of Decayed Musicians, one for each year since the mode of payment had been altered. She had found them in her first week, and had been reading them 4 pages at a time, on the library steps, with a duster in her left hand, ever since. Then, in July, the letter came about the concert. Mr. Bray, the steward, read it aloud at the servants' table. The benefit concert would be held at Denningham on the 22nd of September. The honorary treasurer and secretary, Mr. Hector Cleeve, would arrive on the 18th, and the subscribers would number 80 at a guinea a ticket. And Mr. Bray read, with the particular flatness of a man reading something he disliked. As the instrument at Denningham is understood to be past service, Mr. Cleeve will arrange the hire of a grand pianoforte from Soho Square, with carriage down and back, at a charge to the fund of 30 guineas. Down the table, Tabitha Loder, who was 16 and had a face like an open window, said, 30 guineas to hire a piano when there's one sitting in the house? That will do, Tabitha, said Mrs. Renshaw. Esther put down her fork and did not pick it up again. Past service. The instrument was a 9-year-old grand by Marriott of Soho Square, and she knew, with the flat certainty of a trade, what happens to one that stands 14 months unplayed in a cold room. It goes out of tune, that is all. A day and a half of work, and about 9 shillings worth of materials. 30 guineas was not the price of a hired piano. It was the price of not having the concert take place in the house where 9 blue paper volumes sat on the 3rd shelf of the second press. She could not prove any of it, standing in a passage in a striped cotton gown. But she could take one thing away from Mr. Hector Cleeve. She could make the piano play. She began on the 14th of July at 11:30 at night. It was slow because it had to be silent. She worked with the top down, and a strip of listening felt laid across the strings, so that each note came out no louder than a spoon set on a saucer, 4 or 5 notes a night, and no more. She carried her father's lever in her apron pocket every hour of every day, because a thing in a pocket cannot be found in a box under a bed. By the 9th of September, she had the whole compass within a hair of true, and the low F sharp where a pin had crept was holding. On the 10th, she made a mistake. She played. It was not a decision. She had lifted the listening felt to check the last unison clean, and the room was very quiet, and her hands went on to the keys the way a horse turns in at its own gate. She played 11 bars of a slow air her father used to draw out of a violin in a hired room over a saddler's shop in Chester, arranged badly by her when she was 13. With the top down, the sound came up muffled and warm, like a voice through a wall. She did not hear the door. The door at Denningham made no noise, because she had oiled the hinges herself in her second week. "Go on," the Duke of Denningham said. Esther's hands came off the keys and went into her lap. She stood. The stool went back a foot with a sound like a cough, and she turned, and he was 4 feet inside the room in his shirt sleeves, with a candle in his hand, and his hair pushed up on one side. She didn't apologize. She did not cry. She looked at a point on his waistcoat, and waited to be told to be gone by morning, and thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had got 9 weeks, and had not got what she came for, and would have to find another way. "How long?" he said. 9 weeks, Your Grace." "Every night?" "Most nights. 4 or 5 notes." He came further in and set his candle on the corner of the case. He was 32, dark-haired, blue-eyed, with a soldier's stiffness in one shoulder and the look of a man awake since 3. "Say the rest of it," he said. "You have been in my house 9 weeks, doing a thing I forbade in front of 11 people. You haven't begged, you have not wept, and you have not lied. So there is a reason. Give it to me now." The kind of silence that followed was the kind with a decision inside it. Folded up. "The instrument is not past service," Esther said. "It was never past service. It wanted tuning, it wanted its felts eased, and it wanted a fire in the room twice a week, and it will cost the estate about 9 shillings. There is nothing wrong with it that I haven't already put right, except the low F sharp, which crept, and which is holding now." "You are a housemaid," he said. "Yes." "Who told you all that?" "My father, Your Grace. Elias Lovell. He tuned for the trade in Chester for 26 years, and for 4 of them he tuned this instrument in April and October, until he died. He brought me with him. I was in this room when I was 14, sitting on that window seat with a bag of rest pins on my knees, and your father gave me an orange." The Duke of Denningham did not move at all. "He gave everybody an orange," he said at last. "There was a box of them in the drawer under the keyboard. He thought it was a great joke. "Yes, Your Grace." He put one hand flat on the closed top of the piano, the way a man does on the flank of a horse he has known a long time, and stood like that for the length of 10 breaths. Esther, who had been in service 8 years and knew exactly how much of a man's grief it is safe to see, looked at the floor. "Play it again," he said. "The top up." So she put the top up and played the 11 bars, and then, because 11 bars is not enough for anybody, went on into the whole of it, and the room that had been silent for 14 months came up around the sound like water coming back into a dry channel. When she stopped, he was sitting on the window seat with his elbows on his knees, looking at the carpet. "9 shillings, he said. 9 and 4pence, if the leather is new. And Cleve wants 30 guineas of the fund's money to bring a piano down from London on a wagon." Esther kept her hands on the keys. This was the edge of it, and she had promised herself for 5 months that when the edge came, she would not run at it. "Yes, Your Grace." "Why?" "I could not tell you why. I am not able to know a thing like that." It was, strictly, a true sentence. It was also the first lie she had told him, and she felt it go down into her like a stone into a well. He stood up. At the door he stopped. "The concert is on the 22nd, he said. "That instrument will be in tune, and it will be played, and it will be played in this room, not by you." She had been expecting it, and it still went through her. "No, Your Grace." "Not because you are a maid," he said, with a flash of something impatient. "Because Cleve engages a professional from Manchester, and I will not hand him a reason to write a letter about my household. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes." "Say it back to me." "You are not ashamed of me," Esther said. "You are only careful of him." There was a pause of about 2 seconds, in which she believed she had gone too far, and then the Duke of Denningham laughed, once, with no pleasure in it at all. "Good night, Lovell," he said. He knew her name. She sat in the dark, a long time after he had gone, with her hand flat on the keys, not playing. The 11 days that followed were the strangest of her life, because nothing changed and everything did. At 9 every morning she went to the music room with a can of hot water and her father's lever, and worked in daylight with the door standing open, and twice the Duke came in and sat on the window seat with estate letters he did not read. When she explained that every note on the instrument is very slightly wrong on purpose, so that all the keys can be tolerable, instead of 4 being perfect, and the rest unusable, he sat back and said, "That is the most English thing I have ever heard in my life." And she laughed before she could stop herself, and he looked pleased for about a second and a half. She should have said it then. She has thought since that if she had said it on the 14th of September, standing in a room full of morning light with a strip of hot felt in her hand, the whole of the rest of it would have gone differently, and better. She said, "The low F sharp is holding," and the moment went by like a coach on a road. Mr. Hector Cleve arrived on the 18th in a hired chaise, with 2 portmanteaus and a japanned box. He was 54, broad, pink, and beautifully brushed, in a dark olive-green frock coat and a dove-grey silk waistcoat with a gold watch key on a black ribbon, and he came into the hall calling Mrs. Renshaw by name, and Mrs. Renshaw, who did not like him, could not have said why. Esther was on the half-landing with a basket of linen. He looked up at her, and through her, and said to the Duke, "Your Grace, I am the bearer of a small tragedy. The Soho instrument cannot be got down by the 22nd. A wheel, I am told. A wheel." He spread his hands. "We shall have to move to the assembly rooms at Ashling, which will halve the subscription, or postpone, which will halve it twice." "We shall do neither," said the Duke. "My father's instrument is in tune." Mr. Cleeve's face did an interesting thing. It stayed exactly where it was for slightly too long. "In tune?" he said. "Come and hear it." That night she went to the library. She had read all 9 of the blue volumes by then, 4 pages at a time, and had never once had them all down together. She took them down and laid them open on the floor behind the second press, where the lamp would not show under the door, at the back page of each, which is the page every subscriber turns to first, because it is the page that tells them what their guinea has done. List of pensioners on the fund, with the annual sum payable to each. 40 names. But it was not that they were 40. It was that they were the same 40. In 9 years, on a list of 40 men and women who were on it, because they were old and broken and out of the trade, not one name had gone off it, and not one name had come on. Sarum W., violin, £20. Hartrick J., widow, £12. Beaumont C., organist, £25. 19th on every list, in the same place, in the same type. Lovell J., widow, £12. Her mother's name, printed 9 times, in 9 volumes, in a duke's library, in a house where her mother had never in her life been allowed to stand. Esther sat on the floor with her back against the press and put both hands over her mouth. And she did not cry, because she had trained herself out of it at 17, and it had never come back. Then she got up, took paper and a pencil from the writing table, and did what she had been trained since childhood to do with a thing that was wrong, which was to write it down accurately. She copied all 40 names and the sums, and the total, which was £684 a year, and the printed line beneath it saying the sums had been paid by draft on the fund's bankers at Chester, and the receipts were in the treasurer's hands, open to any subscriber's inspection. Then she hid 2 fair copies, one in her stays and one in the ticking of her mattress, and set the 9 volumes back on the 3rd shelf in the right order with the right spacing. 4 of the names she knew, because the trade was a village of 200 people spread across a county. Sarum of Frodsham, Hartrick of Chester, Beaumont of Northwich, buried the year before the first of these 9 reports. Pato of Nantwich, 4 dead people drawing £77 a year between them, and 1 living woman over a chandler's shop in Chester drawing nothing. On the 19th, she asked Mrs. Renshaw for 4 hours and the price of a place on the carrier's cart, and gave as her reason that her mother was unwell. It was the second lie, and it was less than a lie, because Judith Lovell was 51, and her hands had not closed properly in 6 years. She was back by 9, that night, with 3 things. A note in the parish clerk's hand at Frodsham, a note in the parish clerk's hand at Northwich, and her mother. She put her in the second housemaid's room, empty since Hannah Froude, and explained it. And Judith Lovell listened with her chapped hands, folded, and said, at the end, "And if you are right, Esther, they will turn you off for being a servant who reads." "Yes," Esther said. "I know." What she did not know was that Cleeve had spent that afternoon in the estate office being agreeable to Mr. Bray, and had asked, in the way a man asks about weather, who exactly had put the late Duke's instrument in order, and had been told, in the way a steward tells a guest anything at all, that it was one of the housemaids whose father had been in the trade. On the evening of the 20th, the Duke of Denningham sent for Esther Lovell to the library. She knew before she was through the door. Cleeve stood at the window with his hands behind him. The Duke was at the table with a paper in front of him, and didn't look up when she came in. And that was how she knew. "Mr. Cleeve tells me," he said, "that you gave out here, that you had never been in a house with an instrument in it, that you have been reading the Fund's reports on my library steps since April, and that you are the daughter of a woman on the Fund's list. All of that is true, except the middle of it, Esther said. My character was good and it was honest, and Mr. Renshaw will give it again tomorrow. You did not say why you came. No. Why did you come? She looked at Cleve. Cleve looked back with a sort of gentle sadness, like a man watching a dog he is fond of being taken away, and she understood then why nobody had ever caught him. He never argued with anybody. He agreed with them, warmly, and then arranged for them to be gone. Your Grace, she said, may I answer that in front of 80 people on Thursday, instead of in front of one? Certainly not, said Mr. Cleve pleasantly. I did not ask you, said Esther. The room got very quiet. Your Grace, Cleve said, I have every sympathy. She is a clever girl, badly used by circumstance. But you cannot let a servant with a grievance stand up in your father's music room before the whole subscription. The fund runs on the goodwill of 200 people who could as easily give their guinea to the lifeboats. It is not a grievance, Esther said. My dear young woman, of course it is. It is an arithmetic. She said it in a level voice, without moving, and the Duke of Denningham looked up at her for the first time since she had entered the room. Explain that, he said. Not now. If I explain it now, in this room, with him standing there, he will have 2 days and a night to be sorry and to make it right in private, and it will be made right for my mother alone, and 39 other people will go on as they are. I have waited 8 years. I can wait 2 days. Mr. Hector Cleve laughed and said something about the imagination of servants. The Duke did not laugh. He sat with his hand flat on the table, exactly as he had put it flat on the closed piano, and looked at her for a long, unhurried time. You will not be in the music room on Thursday, he said at last. Esther felt it land. No, Your Grace. You will be at the door of it, with the programmes, and you will hand one to every person who comes in, and when the accounts are read, you will come and stand at my left hand and say your arithmetic out loud in front of every soul in the room. He stood. Mr. Cleve, you look unwell. Mrs. Renshaw will send you something. There were 2 days before the concert, and Esther spent them being a housemaid, because 80 people were coming, and the beds had to be turned. The Duke spent them differently. On the 21st he rode to Chester, and came away with a clerk named Lucius Wade, thin and extremely frightened, and a locked case holding every cancelled draft the fund had drawn since the alteration in the mode of payment. He also wrote to 4 parishes, and sent the letters by his own man, on his own horse, because a letter that goes by the post can be seen going. That evening he came into the music room, where Esther was easing the last of the felts. You lied to me, he said, on the 10th, when I asked why Cleve wanted 30 guineas. Yes. Why? She set the liver down. Because on the 10th you were a man who had just heard his father's piano for the first time in 14 months, and I was a housemaid caught breaking your order. If I had said the next sentence, you would have heard a servant accusing a gentleman to save her place, and you would have been right to hear it that way. I had 4 months of reading and a suspicion. And now? Now I have 9 printed lists, 4 burial entries and my mother. She is in the second housemaid's room since Tuesday. She is 19th on every list. She has had £12 a year for 8 years and never a penny of it, and she can write, and she will say so. The Duke stood in the middle of the room he had kept shut for over a year and looked at the walnut case. He was here every September, he said. He sat at that table and my father signed the accounts. Then my father died, and in June I signed them myself, in London, in about 90 seconds, because a man was waiting to take me to dinner." He stopped. "My name is on the last one. Mine, in my own hand, certifying that the pensions had been duly paid." "Yes," Esther said. "You knew that and didn't say it. What did you think I would do?" "I thought that when you understood that catching him meant standing up in front of 80 subscribers and saying your father was careless and you were idle, you would find a quiet way. I thought you would pay my mother her £100 out of your own pocket, put me on the Chester coach with a good character and a sovereign, and tell yourself for the rest of your life that you had done a decent thing. That is a low opinion. It is an ordinary one." He turned around. "Say what you think now." "I think you are going to stand up on Thursday and let it be said out loud," said Esther Lovell, "and that it will cost you more than the money, and that you know it, and that you are going to do it anyway." She picked up the felt again because her hands wanted work. "And I think that is the first thing that has happened to me in 8 years that I didn't have to make happen myself." He crossed the room and took her right hand, which was rough at the fingertips from the wire, and turned it over, and looked at it, and put it down again. The 22nd was clear and cold, and the carriages began at 6. Esther stood at the music-room door in a cream muslin gown that Mrs. Renshaw had produced from somewhere and would not discuss, with a black velvet sash and no jewellery, and her light brown hair in a plain coiled knot. And she handed a programme to every one of the 81 people who came through and said good evening, and not one of them looked at her twice. The room was full of candles, and the walnut case stood open with the great lid propped. The gentleman from Manchester played a sonata and 2 sets of variations, and played them well. Then Mr. Hector Cleeve rose to read the accounts, as he had risen to read them at Denningham for 9 years, and said that the fund had received £891 and had expended 684 in pensions to 40 deserving persons of the musical profession, whose receipts were in his hands and open to any subscriber's inspection. "Thank you," said the Duke of Denningham, standing up. "Before we go on, every one of you is holding the list. It is the back page. Would you turn to it?" 81 people turned a page, and the sound went round the room like wind in a hedge. "Lovell," said the Duke. Esther came up the side of the room and stood at his left hand, and didn't look at the faces, because faces are not the point, and because her father had told her when she was 9 that when you are frightened in a strange house, you look at the work. "My name is Esther Lovell. I am a housemaid in this house at £12 a year, and my father was Elias Lovell, who tuned pianofortes in this county for 26 years, and tuned this one. I am going to ask you to do a small sum, and you can all do it, because it is only counting." She held up the programme. "There are 40 names on that list. There are 9 of these reports on that table, 1 for every year since the mode of payment was altered. The names this year are the same 40 as last year. They are the same 40 as the year before. In 9 years, on a list of 40 old and broken people, not one name has come off it, and not one name has gone on." She let that sit for the length of 2 breaths, which is exactly as long as an arithmetic needs. "The 14th name is William Sarum, violin, of Frodsham, £20 a year. He was buried at Frodsham on the 11th of March, 1819, and the Duke wrote for his own copy of the entry. The 7th is Charles Beaumont, organist of Northwich, £25, buried in 1816, which is the year before the first of these 9 reports. He has been dead longer than the list has existed, and he has drawn £225. The 31st is Samuel Pitto of Nantwich. My father carried his coffin. Somewhere near the back, a chair moved. The 19th name is Lovell, J. widow, £12. That is my mother. She is standing at the door at the back of this room in a borrowed shawl. She was put on that list 8 years ago last March, and in 8 years she has had £96 printed against her name in books like the one in your hands, and has received nothing. Not 1 shilling. Not 1 letter that was not a promise. She washed linen until her hands stopped closing, and I went into service at £8 a year, and every September a room like this one applauded the fund that was keeping her. The silence in the music room at Denningham that night was of a particular quality. It was not shock. Shock is loud. It was the sound of 81 people doing the same small sum at once and all arriving at the same place. That, said Mr. Hector Cleeve, in a voice of enormous patient kindness, is a very affecting speech, and I do not doubt 1 word of the young woman's distress. The pensions are paid through the county agents. If an agent has failed in his duty, I shall look into it tomorrow. It is not a reason to disturb this company. There are no county agents, said the Duke of Denningham. He said it without raising his voice at all. The fund's drafts are drawn on Chalmers and Company at Chester. Mr. Wade of that house is here. Wade stood up in the 3rd row, white to the collar, with a case in his arms. Every draft since 1817 has been paid over the counter at Chester in cash. Not 1 was ever remitted to a county agent, because the fund has never had one. 312 drafts, Mr. Wade. 312, Your Grace. Endorsed by how many hands? 1, Your Grace, said Lucius Wade. Every draft is endorsed in the same hand and presented at our counter by the same gentleman. We have the signature book. It is Mr. Cleeve's. Mr. Hector Cleeve stood quite still in front of 81 subscribers with the accounts in his hand, and what came apart in him was not his composure. His composure held to the end, which was somehow the worst of it. What came apart was the thing underneath, the borrowed competence of a man who for 9 years had only ever had to be believed and had never once had to be right. "The receipts," he said, "are in my hands." "Then send for them," said the Duke. "They are in London." "They are in the japanned box in your bedroom in this house," said the Duke of Denningham, "because you have never in 9 years let it out of your sight, and Mr. Bray has been standing outside that door for an hour." They brought the box down and opened it on the card table in front of everybody, and there were the receipts, 312 of them, signed by 40 different pensioners, and everyone written out in the same neat, unhurried, beautifully brushed hand. Esther did not need to look. She had known what was in that box since July, the way you know the end of a road you have walked in the dark. She went to the back of the room instead and took her mother's arm, and Judith Lovell said, "Don't," which meant, "Do not make a show of me," and Esther said, "I am not going to," and walked her out into the passage and sat her on a chair by the window while the room behind them made the sound that 81 people make when a thing is finished. She played the second half after all, and not one of the 81 went home. The arithmetic of it afterward ran as follows. Mr. Hector Cleeve was committed at the Michaelmas sessions and tried at the Spring Assize on 9 counts of obtaining money by false pretences and 1 of forgery, and the jury took 11 minutes. He had taken £4,030 over 9 years from 200 people who liked music and thought it a decent thing to be kind to old men who had played it. His house at Highgate was sold, and every penny of it went back into the fund. Judith Lovell received £96 in a single draft at Denningham on the 4th of October, looked at it for a long time, and said, I would rather have had it at £12 a year, which Esther thought the truest thing anybody said about it. On the 2nd of October, the Duke stood up at the first meeting of the reconstituted fund and said that he had signed the accounts of 1821 without reading them, that his father had signed 8 before that on the strength of a warm manner and a good waistcoat, and that the fault was not one man's cleverness, but 40 gentlemen's convenience. Then he proposed a rule, and the rule was Esther's, and he said so, by name, standing up. The list was to be read aloud, every name and every sum, at the door of the annual concert before anybody was let in, and any person on it who had not been paid was to be brought to the front and heard. It cost the fund nothing. It took 11 minutes. It has been done every September since. On the 9th of October, the Duke came into the music room, where Esther was setting the low F sharp for the 2nd time, because a pin that has crept once will creep again. "I want to say a thing badly," he said, "and I would rather do it than practice it." She put down the lever. "I have been in this room every day for a month, and I was not in it for a year before that, and the difference is not the piano." He looked at her. "I do not want to give you a place, and I do not want to be the man who was kind to you. I want you to marry me. I know what it will cost you, because it will cost you being told for the rest of your life that a duke took a housemaid out of his own kitchen." Esther Lovell stood with her hand on the walnut case, and found she had been ready for this for 3 weeks, and had not once let herself know it. "I have a condition," she said. "Name it." "I keep the trade, not as an accomplishment. I keep the tools and I take the work. There are 4 instruments in this house and 11 within a day's drive, and they all want a hand twice a year, and I'm not going to sit in a drawing-room being told I have a great deal of natural feeling by women who cannot hear a wolf-fifth. My father was worth 300 a year and never got it, because he had a worse opinion of himself than anybody else had of him. I am not going to do that. That is your condition. That is my condition. Then it is a poor bargain for me," said the Duke of Denningham, "because I meant to insist on it anyway." And he took her face in both hands and kissed her in the middle of the afternoon, in a room with the door standing open, which was very much on purpose. They were married at Ashling on the 14th of November, and the last 4 rows of the church were filled with old men in good coats who had come from Frodsham and Northwich and Nantwich by the carrier's cart, and one of them, who was 81 and had played second oboe at Vauxhall in 1794, stood outside in the rain afterward and played them out, badly, on an instrument mended with string. 2 years later, the benefit concert took 209 guineas, and the list was read aloud at the door by a boy of 11, apprenticed to the Duchess of Denningham that spring on articles she drew up herself, because she had discovered that nobody in England would take a girl, and intended to be a problem about it in due course. The music room at Denningham is not shut now. The lid stands up all day, propped on the long stick, and there is a fire in there twice a week from October, and the room is used, which is what a room is for. There is a shallow drawer under the keyboard that the 5th Duke kept oranges in. In it there is a steel tuning lever with an ebony handle worn pale on one side, and it is not there as an ornament. It is there because it is wanted on Tuesdays, and on the desk of that instrument, in a plain black frame, stands one printed page, the back page of the annual report of the Fund for the Relief of Decayed Musicians for the year 1821. 40 names with a sum against each, the 19th of them, Lovell, J., widow, £12. It is the only thing in the house nobody dusts around. The Duchess does it herself on Tuesday mornings before she starts work.